Greetings, as I, Tantus Naramantico, your Lord and Emperor here of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome once more. Are you ready to dive into the Demiplanes of Dread? Yes, today we're heading to Ravenloft and learning about the Darklords. This is a complex subject that we're going to be dealing with, and I will tell you and kind of get into the details. Let's start with the basics, though. Hi, hello, everybody, whether you're joining me, of course, over on Twitch or over on YouTube. Remember to give the proper likes. I'll give another shout-out at the end of the video, but for now, remember, support. So, let's first just chat a little bit about the Demiplanes of Dread and the Darklords and who they are. This video was one that took me a little bit to figure out what I wanted to go over and how I wanted to define it, and I'm going to give you examples. 10 main examples plus 2. The examples will be some that are very classic Ravenloft, some that have been altered by the various editions, some that are unique to 5th edition, some that are unique to older editions in depth, and of course then our 2 special cases. So, to get into the basics of the Demiplanes of Dread without getting into too much of a mess, it originated in the Ravenloft campaign setting. The idea is they are demi-planes, not full planes, that are cursed by these dark lords, these dark spirits, these dark energies that effectively trap people in the mists of Ravenloft. But each realm of Ravenloft isn't formed out of nothing. They don't just come into being. They are distinctly tied to a dark lord. Basically, a being that has committed some kind of crime, some kind of atrocity, done something so dark and terrible, sometimes calling out to darker powers, other times just getting the attention of the darker powers, they are drawn into the mists, into Ravenloft, and put in place of a realm. Sometimes the area they're in, a la Strahd, when we talk about him, is drug into the demiplane with them. Entire regions disappear into Ravenloft. Other times, it's places that are formed out of their will within Ravenloft. We'll talk about both examples. But regardless, these places then become homes to those that become trapped there, drawn in to it. And those that rule over it can control the mists. Whether people enter or not, they can draw people in, draw individuals in, draw creatures in, creatures created from their darkness. They become akin to gods of their realms. And it isn't that they can't be replaced, they can't die, but it requires unique and difficult circumstances. They are prisoners as much as they are lords. A dark lord, just as much as they rule unabated in their realm, cannot escape it. Only when the dark powers deem them unworthy or deem them no longer lord will they lose that. Which we will talk about for some changes in lordship of some regions through the various editions. So that's the basic idea of a Dark Lord and a Demiplane of Dread. And they are closely tied together. That's the thing is, when I talk about these, I can't just talk about the Dark Lord. I do have to give a little bit of introduction to the realm they are in, because they are tied together. They are lords of this land. They are gods of this land, to a degree. They are not nigh omnipotent, but they are in control of it, can control the mists, can basically put a lot of power forth. They are its lord. And yes, as long as they have that title, they will come back. In Curse of Strahd, you can kill Strahd in that book, in that adventure. Strahd will be back. It specifically says that. Unless the curse of him being tied to Barovia and being a Dark Lord is removed, he will be a Dark Lord. Unless he is replaced by another, he will be a Dark Lord and will come back. You can't get rid of him permanently. So now we understand the basics of Dark Lords. We understand the basics of Ravenloft, just a little bit. Let's talk about sources for if you were looking into Dark Lords. And then I will use our perfect great example of all the Darklords, Strahd, to continue this discussion. So, books. Well, I can of course shout out the 5th edition book as a good start place, because this is the 5th edition lore, Vanrik's Guide to Ravenloft. I will tell you, and I'm going to, while we're here, preface this. I like most of what 5th edition does to at least Ravenloft's lore. I think I've been a proponent of certain things when it comes to lore, especially for these extended universes beyond Forgotten Realms, beyond Greyhawk, things like Dragonlance, Planescape, and Spelljammer. I do think they've been treated very well the same way. Ravenloft, I think, was treated okay. Ravenloft was hard to get wrong. There are certain changes that are very good here, and certain changes that are very questionable. I will mention a good change. The Vistani. Vistani that were introduced in the Curse of Strahd book, which are a unique group unto themselves, though have very real-world parallels to basically Gypsy culture, to Romani culture. Romani culture. I have to say it correctly. That's me forgetting for a minute there. That's my naming tradition, so apologies there. But Romani culture has been looked down on very badly over years, and I have to say, unfortunately, in older editions, they were just referred to as gypsies. And a lot were used to mimic Romani culture. They are separate now. This was a smart move. Thank you, Wizards. This was actually a great move. And creating an own culture of its own, because then you can use that culture in your stories and not go for tropes and very insulting things. So, anyway, we have, changes like that in 5th edition. We'll talk about some of them for one of these Darklords, but this is a great place to start. I would actually recommend this. Definitely check it out. It gives a lot of great information on a lot of Darklords. It does a little bit of information on some of them that are old Darklords and some new ones, and it introduced some big information on some new ones, which we'll talk about too. If you want to look for older books, this is a box set. This was the best picture I could find of the box set, The Realm of Terror for Ravenloft. Finding the original box set, probably not easy. You can find PDFs online of this, so keep that in mind. They are, I think, on DriveThruRPG, if you want to check this out. But the original Realm of Terror book does some great information. Again, this is early 90s. The Gypsy-verse, Vistani thing is definitely something that's in there. It's still there, unfortunately, that they're not even calling them Romani. It's there. So there's stuff that's bad here. This is old TSR. Please keep that in mind if you're going to get into this. You can pick it up for a lot of the core things. I just also think for the 5th edition one, they didn't talk about some of the really dark stuff in the lore. They don't shy away from the dark stuff in this lore, which is a mixed bag of good and bad. So keep that in mind. But similarly, there's other 2nd edition books you can check out for more information on Darklords. Again, you can use whatever basics you want, but keep in mind, for whatever age you are looking at these, will reflect the cultural zeitgeist to a degree at the time, and the zeitgeist of D&D. So, there could be problematic stuff in there. You can just choose not to use the problematic stuff, and just use the basics of the lore. Or talk about it in a mature way. Mature discussions are also good. Anyway, the Ravenloft campaign setting, which you would think would be different, but this is actually more AD&D versus 2nd edition in AD&D, so this is an update. And then the Ravenloft Darklords book, accessory, is a very good place. And I did want to mention it, the 3rd edition Ravenloft book, because there's a 3rd edition Ravenloft book, and you notice it's got that sword and sorcery on it. Yes, D&D gave Ravenloft over to a third party. Sword and Sorcery had their own setting and a lot of stuff, but they were one of the major third-party groups during 3rd edition. Sword and Sorcery is basically White Wolf. White Wolf was publishing some stuff. So I like some of the Sword and Sorcery stuff. Some of it is not greatly balanced. I really haven't checked out the Ravenloft stuff for a while. I didn't use any of this for today's video, but I wanted to mention it because it will have some stuff on Darklords, and it might give you some ideas for updates. Now, Strahd. Before we dive into Strahd directly, I do want to give some basics informations on Ravenloft to help you understand its history and how the plane works. Because currently, the Demiplanes are vaguely connected. What do I mean by that? Well, certainly places like the Sea of Sorrow connects with other Demiplanes. The Carnival travels and connects with other Demiplanes. All of them do that technically. There was something called the Core. The core of Ravenloft were Demiplanes which were semi-adjacent to each other originally. Effectively, unless the Darklord didn't permit it, you could theoretically travel between the different Demiplanes of the core if they had permission. They were adjacent yet not adjacent. There was a terrain, there was almost like a map you could have of where things were near each other, where the countries were close to each other. Some things happened. And I'm going to talk about the Darklord who did this, because he's gone, Azalin Rex. But Azalin Rex did two major things which altered Ravenloft in attempts to escape. Yeah, this guy up with shit. First off, there was the Grand Conjunction, also known as the Great Upheaval. Basically, Aslan triggered something that shocked the Demiplane of Dread to its foundation. For a brief time, effectively, he found a way to connect Ravenloft with the material plane. Probably at the time, it would either have been Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms. I can't say for sure, because all the material planes are connected to it. We'll talk about it. But he basically opened up all the borders and allowed things to spill through. It didn't last. Things happened, and the conjunction collapsed. The Demiplanes reformed. It drew back the Darklords into their prisons. They had a chance to escape. We were trying to. During that, the geography shifted around. Some Demiplanes were absorbed by the others. Others disappeared. New ones formed. It just shook up Ravenloft and kind of damaged the borders. After that, it changed how things worked to a degree. And we see in 5th edition, they don't talk about them being really connected up together more. It's assumed by the time we get into the 5th edition time period, the result of the Grand Conjunction has maximized this place where they are less connected. It doesn't mean you couldn't connect them together now. It doesn't mean they aren't theoretically connected. It just means that it's a lot harder to have individuals travel those mists and stuff like that. Hello, kitty. Behave yourself. You're in my bed? Great. That's only one of 2 things he did. The other thing he did, I will talk about when we talk about Azalin Rex. He did something else, which again, could link to this disconnect. I don't mind this disconnect necessarily, that we don't have the necessary map of Ravenloft, that they are vaguely spiritually connected. Some of them, like the sea is connected to places that have water, and, the Carnival can travel around. Other ones can kind of, meld in and out of each other, so that they kind of, they're not, the core is shattered. They can meld with each other and connect with each other by just chance here and there, and have these touchings of it. But the Demiplanes are almost kind of separate from each other. And in 5th edition, they're supposed to be in Shadowfell, so whether or not they're their own kind of thing out in nowhere or directly connected to Shadowfell, that's up to you two for how you want to interpret it. Let's talk Strahd now and Barovia, because this is the classic example, and it's also an important example to talk about, because, and I've got to let you know here, this man created Ravenloft as we know. It's not to say that the Demiplanes didn't exist, and the dark powers that be within them, the dark forces, were there. But they didn't exist as they are now until Strahd showed up. What did Strahd do? Let's see what the cat's up to no good. Well, Strahd was native to the area known as Barovia. It was a place in some material plane somewhere. Its exact location. It was a region. So keep that in mind. It was a region in somewhere with a curse that created Strahd and drew his castle, and it also drew his land there. And so he's intrinsically connected to it. He was a ruler of Barovia. He was a ruthless conqueror that had brutal military campaigns out in areas, killing rivals, attacking people, and spilling blood, doing very horrible things. And originally these wars and battles were to honor his, as a prince of Barovia, his parents, the king and queen. He constructed Castle Ravenloft in the valley. So his youth of war there. He used his victories to construct the castle. And he did have, well, with his younger brother, Sergei. But Sergei fell in love with Tatiana, a local villager lady, a woman. The two of them fell in love, but Strahd also found a beauty in Tatiana and wanted her. He basically then found the Amber Temple, which is an area in the region there that had connections to the dark powers of Ravenloft. Basically, were they old gods? Were they dark gods lost? Were they worshipped there? These dark powers that were basically sealed away or connected to what would be the original core of Ravenloft that still existed, they were connected to it still. And this one place in Barovia. There were probably other places that these dark powers are connected to in various material planes. Heck, there are plenty of Darklords that have called out to darker powers, and they've heard, and sometimes have found things like the Amber Temple and gotten into it, and others that just kind of been drawn in. So you can see the difference between here, but this is one finding it. So when Sergei and Tatiana were going to get married, Strahd basically murdered him, sealed the power pact with the dark powers, drank his blood, basically revealed his might as becoming a vampire to Tatiana. Tatiana basically leapt off of Castle Ravenloft to her death, vanishing into the mists, basically, and, you know, this murder basically had everybody rise up against him, and Strahd didn't die, became effectively what is thought to be the multiverse's first vampire from this. I'll give and take that, you know. 5th edition says that, but whatever, who knows, you know, whether he's the source of vampirism. But this basically act and this war and the dark powers basically giving him into him gave him strength and drew him into, and Barovia, into becoming the first true Demiplane of Dread. You know, the exact origins unknown, but his connection to Barovia, that land, and the presence of things like the Amber Temple basically drew it into what we call the Shadowfell at this point in time, and became the first true, what we know of, Demiplane of Dread. So Strahd is, in fact, with this story, and I'll probably do another video on Strahd going into full depth on his entire story, and him as a Darklord. But yeah, so he's a powerful master vampire, rules over the area. His land is a sanctuary to the Vistani who know how to travel the mists and go to the various demiplades. And basically, Strahd closes his border whenever someone threatens to escape, and can change the mists from just confusing to poisonous. That's an important note which we'll talk about, that he can change the mist to poisonous. Yeah. So he has his own unique versions of mist, and there's a lot to more in depth in Strahd. But as I said, I wanted to introduce him, and I'm using him to show you Strahd is a very important character to Ravenloft, because he is the first true Dark Lord that we know of. Anything that would be from before then doesn't exist anymore. He shaped Ravenloft to what it is. Let's talk about some more Darklords. So I got 2 more classics. And this is from a art from a Magic the Gathering card. It was the best I could find for the God Brain. the God Brain. It's an Elder Brain, an Illithid Elder Brain. But it's more than just that. It's a Darklord. And, you know, you say stuff, well, Elder Brains exist with Illithids. They have multiples. Why is this one different? Well, basically what happened is one Elder Brain found that it was indulging experience with basically lesser beings without compassion or reference for them, exploring the boundaries of time, reality, immortality, the multiverse, failing catastrophically occasionally. Basically, he's committing a lot of atrocities. And he revealed a malignant truth about existence, which he was unprepared for. And he basically turned and preyed upon his peers, consuming their discovery and their physical forms. And basically, the weight of these problems began to have his form repel. Remember, an Elder Brain is comprised of a lot of Illithid brains coming together. And so he was basically almost diseased. Other Elder Brains turned against him, expelled him, basically tried to destroy this diseased brain from existence. This one that was basically consuming others, unhealthily, and basically had dove into darkness it shouldn't have, and was becoming this malignant creature with atrocities far beyond that any Elder Brain normally would do. Elder Brains aren't really great creatures. Think about that. A creature that's pretty awful, doing really awful things for that level of it. Like, it's like, oh, you're doing really horrible things for our people. Wow, our people are pretty awful. We put worms in your brains, eat them and replace them and change your body over. Yeah. So, he went to a place without time or reality, basically being drawn out there, expelled from existence. And the Dark Powers found this dying Elder Brain and planted it in a tormented world. And so, in Bluetspur, basically, he's been able to indulge in his demented schemes to basically save its own life, and its alien existence, you know. It's a sheer fact that even though it's, like, technically immortal within the Dark Realms, it still sees itself as dying and falling and stuff like that. And so, yeah. And its realm of Bluetspur is an alien world. It's got impossible geometry, it's impossibly sized. It's a very weird alien place. Because of the alien nature of its master, the Godbrain, and also its seeming actual madness for one of its own kind. So Bluetspur is another classic. It's been around. We have one more classic Darklord I wanted to talk about before we move on to our next category of Darklords, and that's this one, shown in this. It's got the sign here, but this is actually a picture of a D&D trading card, because they did them back in the 90s, and this is a Ravenloft one of William Godefroy. Hey, if any of you out there join me in playing Elden Ring, they actually have a character named Godefroy in that one. And I'm wondering if they mentioned this because of Godfrey, which is possible, or if really, because it's a kind of ghost of the past. Someone in FromSoft is a fan of Ravenloft. Just saying. Could be possible. But Wilfred Godefroy is a wonderful, wonderful man who rules over a land of ghosts. Yes. And by wonderful man, I mean he's an awful man that did a lot of terrible things in his life. I mean a lot of terrible things. What do I mean by that? Well, he murdered a lot of people before he died. I mean a lot of people. It started out with him murdering his, his father. So that was the first thing he did. Murdering his father and taking over his estate. Yep. And then, being angry and abusive, he eventually murdered his wife and daughter. Yay! No, not yay. It's kind of awful. But that didn't get him peace. In his evil and madness, the things he killed rose as ghosts and spirits to haunt him. Oh boy. So basically, he caused himself to have his own problems. Because, killing his father, killing his wife and daughter, they all haunted him. Drove him kind of a little mad. And, so, haunted by those, basically drove him a little mad. So, yeah. He basically then offed himself in order to get rid of that. But guess what happened to him? He also rose to the ghost. Still tormented by the other ghosts around him. An awful man gets what he deserves a lot. You can say that. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there because, we have to talk about the things he did as a ghost. He basically still wanted to put his spirits of himself and his family to permanent rest. He's like, crap, we're ghosts. I don't like this anymore. Stop tormenting me. Yeah, I murdered you. Okay, big deal. I'm dead too. I'm a ghost. Can we stop this now? Let's put this to rest. He possessed the body of an adventurer. Tried to use that. That adventurer died. And his ghost also began to haunting him. He sought different kinds of help. He basically haunted an alchemist, urging him to research mortal souls. He crafted an artifact known as the apparatus to separate the soul from a living body and translate souls from one body to another, manipulate the substance and energy of the spirits of living and undead. He hoped he could spend all spirits, including himself, deserved rest. But had an opposite effect, and the basically necromantic energy went over his region of Mordenshire and killed every living being in it. And then the mists rose. And Godefroy became a Darklord over a land of ghosts, haunted by the spirits of those he basically killed. Because not only had he killed his father, his wife, his daughter, that adventurer, but basically everybody living in his region. Killed a lot of people. And Mordent, his region, basically is haunted by the spirits of everybody he killed, and the Dark Lord Godefroy rules over it. All living souls that dwell in Mordent are doomed to haunt the domain, basically long after their mortal bodies die. Because he killed them in a way that is very awful. He tore their living souls from their bodies, and their bodies just then... Pretty awful way to die. Becoming a ghost. Forcefully. So yeah. It is known that Strahd and Azalin found a way to visit Mordenshire and Mordent. But yes, there's a little bit of change in there that I do like here. Originally, it was just the visit of Strahd and Azalin that created it. But I feel like as an early realm on the edge with them visiting it and basically kind of helping draw it in there at the end isn't bad part of the storytelling. But that was the original way it was. It was much more indirect, and it was... He did less murdering. The entire, powerful apparatus, I think, came in after his original introduction. So there's a little bit of changes here in his lore, but mild. But Godefroy, good old Godefroy, there he is. Everybody loves Godefroy and his ability to, murder an entire region of people. I wanted to keep him here because there's some changes, but they're very mild changes in the way they talk about it. And it does disconnect him from some of the other Demiplanes to a degree in the stories of it. But I feel like having him kind of included in there that during his early times, Strahd and Azalin, when they were still finding ways to try to pierce the mists and kind of travel, went there. They could not stay for very long because, yes, Azalin had managed to find a way to sort of transverse it, but still, Strahd was a Dark Lord. couldn't escape his prison for very long. It was more like a slight parole that Azalin had helped him find a way to do. Alright. Speaking of Azalin Rex, we have to. And we have to talk about his Inheritors, too. This is in part of his region of Darkon. Azalin Rex is an interesting character in the lore. Much of his history isn't really talked about the same way because he doesn't exist anymore. Which makes sense. We knew he disappeared during a time period. In old Ravenloft lore. Basically, he's a powerful lich. If you understand liches, you know, they're basically spellcasters who use, you know, special rituals to become immortal. Mostly wizards, sometimes can be other spellcasters, but yes. This is one of the forms, a nice picture I found of him online. It does match a lot of his old art. He emphasizes his undead nature. He wears a cape and a burial shroud, girdled pieces of jewelry, rings, armbands, necklace. It's usually blood red trim. He openly displays his withered body, and he wears a black iron crown on his head with a single yellow gem. That's at least his original incarnation. So, who is this woman? A human who became obsessed with powers, became a lich, ruled and tormented. Basically, his subjects for decades. A powerful band of mercenaries was hired to destroy him. He was near capture, fled into a glen cloaked in fog, and he disappeared in the mists of Ravenloft. Not as a Dark Lord. He found himself in Barovia, under Strahd. Trapped in Ravenloft, he understood that Strahd was the ruler here. He understood that he had magic power greater than Strahd, but his power as a Dark Lord and as a vampire was something to be feared. He had greater magic power. So he basically, he didn't understand, he wanted to know more about Strahd's connection to the world. He did think that if Strahd was destroyed completely, all of Barovia and himself would cease to exist. So, this is kind of what he believed a little bit. Whether that's completely true or not, we'll talk about it. Darkon proves it sort of is. So, he became Strahd's servant. He loathed it. He wanted to win his freedom and escape from this realm. It was more than escaping from servitude of Strahd. It was getting out of here. Under Strahd, he taught them more sorceries and magic, investigated the mists, trying ways to escape. He found a way to have passage to Mordent. Except, basically, where the apparatus in Mordent was what helped get them there. The fact of the creation of the apparatus and the use of it. Remember, I mentioned the apparatus. It was big on our good friend Godefroy's realm. That's effectively what helped them get there. But Mordent now connected Ravenloft. It wasn't escape. The Lich eventually found that powers of personality could grant you a land in Ravenloft. So he walked into the choking mists of Strahd's domain. Strahd, remember, can block it by creating poison. Liches are immune to poison. So he's able to break through, by sheer force of will, Strahd's boundaries. His poisoned mists, which cut his land off. And he created Darkon, which for time was the largest domain in Ravenloft. Now we get to today. We talked about at the beginning today, one of the things he did, the Grand Conjunction. That wasn't his only act as Dark Lord. He did one more. One more attempt at something. With the Grand Conjunction failing. Basically, there was another thing, Arak, which was a domain where it was a Demiplane of Dread that were Drow inhabited disappeared. The Drow were gone. But Arik was absorbed into Darkon. So again, Grand Conjunction, I talked about a little bit. I talked about how realms were absorbed into each other, some combined together. I'll talk about one that combined two planes together that was a little bit more pleasant. But yes, in this one at least, a realm was absorbed by Darkon, and everything there went away. So that was probably the worst case scenario for some, absorption. Now we get to the Hour of Ascension. What is the Hour of Ascension? Well, it was another thing that Azalin was trying to do. Its result was basically the deceased would rise in their flames and claim the domain for themselves. Rise all that had been dead in Darkon. Almost everyone that lived in the domain would rise as an undead. This requiem occurred, and the darkest night, almost you could call. Basically, Azalin activated a doomsday device. A wave of negative energy. Every living creature in a mile died and reanimated. And Azalin merged with his domain. Demilords have claim to power since his disappearance. 6 of them originally, claiming regions. Only 3 remain. But the result of this is technically Azalin has merged with the land. They don't talk about it in 5th edition too much, but he's disappeared. And the thing is, he doesn't exist the same way anymore. His merging with Darkon hasn't been as successful. Darkon is failing. Darkon is crumbling. It is disappearing. And 3 Demilords have taken his place. Darkon is still the Darklord. Azalin still is the Darklord. He still controls the land, sort of, maybe, but he's gone. And there's annihilation. Darkon is failing. What does this mean? What happened with, will he be able to return, etc., etc. Currently, I'm not going to go into details about the Inheritors of Darkon. There are 3 of them that are mentioned in the 5e book. I'm going to assume that these are the 3 remaining out of the original 6, or these are 3 that remain after the war, if more came to power and stuff like that. And, yeah. So, Azalin is gone. And, yeah. Effectively, the Hour of Ascension, his attempts where he kind of merged with the land, was actually the escape, was that his soul? In old edition, it says he's more merged, doesn't mean he actually escaped. There's a lot of questions about what happened to Azalin. And I think I like it better that 5th edition leaves it a little bit more questioning, that whether or not, his consciousness just merged with the land, whether he actually escaped, and then the Demiplane is slowly collapsing because it doesn't have a Darklord anymore, someone that can rival his power. Hard to say. Or maybe he ascended to being another dark power, another dark spirit. There's a lot of questions, and honestly speaking, you can take anything you want from Azalin and his Inheritors. But Darkon is a major part of this old lore and the massive changes through the old lore into the modern lore. And Azalin Rex is at the heart of it. Alright, we're going to talk about 2, count them 2, Darklords with this one. And why 2? Because, well, there are 2 in Borca. Borca, though, may I note, was 2 realms with 2 different Darklords that merged together. Ivana Borsti is this one here. Ivana Borsti. I'm probably butchering this, but Ivan Dillisnya was another Darklord of his own domain, which is gone now. Interesting. Yeah. his land merged with Borca in the Great Convocation. Conjunction. The Grand Conjunction. Let's talk about each of them. The two Darklords of Borca. Because they're also technically related. You've got to keep that in mind. They are two relatives to each other. The two Lords of Borca. And Ivan has altered very much so by the merger. Ivan is a much different being than he was in a lot of ways, but the same still, too. Ivana remains the same. So, it's a noble domain established in lots of intrigue, and because it has two Darklords, that's why a lot of intrigue happens. It's got two powers vying there. And both of them are Darklords in their own right. Ivana, well, she was born to a very wealthy family. Her family, the Boritsi family. And basically, her father saw her unfit to lead the family. She had her youth in dalliances. Basically, she didn't have... Instead of learning the essence of her family's business on perfumes and medical herbs, her mother encouraged her to try to ensure that she would one day lead the family. Basically, she met a skilled chemist and learned alchemy and grew close to the chemist. Her mother recognized her budding romance and saw the lowborn basically as a threat to her prospects. So her mother seduced the young chemist and arranged for Ivana to discover them. Basically, trying to get rid of them separated. Ivana took this lesson in a very different way. She realized the corruption of her family. So she poisoned her mother and her callous brothers, basically forcing her father Klaus to name her as heir. She became a poisoner. She employed a series of aromatic toxins, and she watched her siblings and mother sicken and die, and she was not suspected. On her 18th birthday, Klaus summoned her to office to share her decision. Basically, she wanted her cousin, Ivan Dillisnya, to be the heir. Here's the connection between the two of them. They're cousins. It's maybe why, when their two domains merged, you got two Darklords. Yeah. They have little to do with each other, though. Keep that in mind. And they don't describe the history, the Grand Conjunction, as much in the 5th edition books. They're just like, oh, they were drawn in together and they're two Darklords. I like some of using the old history. I mean, you can ignore the old history all you want. I like it because it's a very interesting and complex situation that the Demiplanes evolve and change and alter their nature and stuff like that, that we have the original kind of drawing things in and connecting together, almost creating a continent of dread. Anyway, basically, he'd sent a messenger already, and she effectively then just unleashed toxic mist across the entire estate. She had taken the antidote and replaced the perfume that was in the estate with poison. She watched as her father and all the workers and inhabitants died, choking in this violet fog. And when the mist cleared, she was now in Borca. The land of Borca had become drawn in with her, basically, I should say. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful history there of her just murdering the crap out of her family as a poisoner. She's not the only Dark Lord of Borca. This is the 5th edition picture of this guy, which is... I'm sorry, he got the short end of the stick here. Poor Ivan. Ivan doesn't look so good. So originally, let's talk about original and new Ivan a little bit here, because I have a little bit more on him. He was kind of a cherubic man, 5'7", kind of a little plump. Lord grandson of Dr. Germain d'Honoraire. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. A small, thin man of 5'7", weighing 120 pounds. Light blue eyes. Would slide his tongue about his teeth. Foppish. He did theatrical costumes. He was the only son of Boris Dillisnya. A distant cousin and relative. Were visiting Strahd's castle for some wedding. He left early, and then Strahd did his thing in Barovia, the part of Ravenloft. He was part of the group that rose away, but theoretically were trapped in Ravenloft forever. So, I'll kind of talk about this original history and his new history too. So, this is one of the things, is this family, noble family, visiting for Castle Ravenloft. The murder happened, he became trapped in Ravenloft. Ivan's father grew up in Barovia, married a group and had a daughter. Basically, then their distant cousin became Lord Borca, and Ivan moved to a nearby domain. He merely considered them the wrong side of the family tree. They should be burned. Stefana, the wife, bore the second son, Ivan, who was destined to become Lord of Dorvina. At the same time, Camilla gave birth to Ivana, born on the same day. And the two children were evil twins, basically. Yeah. So Ivan tormented animals, played harmless pranks, poisoned servants, poisoned his mother. His sister was the only one that could keep him in check. When his sister took a husband, he became jealous. When she gave birth to a child, Ivan poisoned her husband, poisoned his sister. The midwife did save the baby, though. He was chased, basically, from the area and became ruler of the land of Dorvinia. He took a bride, who bore them 3 children. Ivan believes they were stillborns. They say the midwife snatched the babies away. And he did kill his wife eventually after the 3 children, too. So kind of an awful person there. Very murderous. But the changes which... we can see. We'll kind of talk about it. Basically, Borca was conquered by the Zarovich. And it does still say there were some of both of these families at the night of Strahd's transformation. So, yeah. Ivan was very much so a sociopath. And his sister was the only thing that kept him in check still. And, yeah. They just have him poisoning her family. And basically because she was going to be sent to on the night Ivana Boritsi poisoned her family, Ivan learned from parents' attention to send Christina to a prestigious boarding school. And she basically killed everyone. And it was the last living member. And mist closed around Borca. An interesting way to say that... This is an interesting one because his lore is vastly different. And I would say you could probably come up with something in the middle. They kind of walked away, feelings for his sister that he definitely kind of had in his sociopathy way. And they downplayed a little bit and still had him murder everybody. I can see him still kind of murdering everybody and kind of changing a little bit. Certainly speaking, things could have altered with the 2 demiplanes kind of merging together. He had his own for a while, and there's a lot of details on how you'd want to work out the changes between the lore here, and I think it's making it a little less awful in certain ways and a little bit more murdery in other ways, that he then, started with his sister and her family, and then started killing everybody at the estate, and that basically drew him in originally as a Dark Lord, and his current state is as a old man that's still as physically fit as his prime, is a result of maybe his realm merging with the other. I don't know. God. See, these are the three that have had major changes between the editions that I wanted to talk about, because they are major changes between the editions that make it a very difficult discussion. Now, we have one more in this group, and we're going to talk about first the Madam here a little bit, because she's a good place to start with this, because this is the current Dark Lord of Lamordia, Viktra Mordenheim. Now, this is removing and ignoring, especially the way they write it here, all of Lamoria's previous Dark Lord. Why? I don't know. Reading up some basics on the old Dark Lord and its creator doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't be things that could be used with it. And the current one bears the same name, and I found some stuff online that basically could easily just say a relative and stuff. So let's go over the basics of where Vix does stuff here. Viktra, progeny of a noble family, the Mordenheims. Self-taught medicine, a researcher, dabbled into a lot of curiosity about life and stuff like that. Convinced she could create life, she could defeat death. Basically fell in love with a body snatcher named Elise. Supplying of your medical experiments. Elise basically began to get a medical disease, so Viktra tried to find a way to save her. And basically, glimpse of death. Elise died. She brought her to the lab after a lot of experiments, poured what she had done into from thousands of deaths into saving one life, becoming a masterpiece with the unbreakable heart. Stitched the device into place, and basically she saw Elise rise with the heart blinking. She lost consciousness and then found herself in Lamordia. Her genius celebrated there. She's basically then continuing her experiments and searching for Elise, her love. Okay. Pretty simple thing, but again, here's where it ignores the old Dark Lords completely. Well, I should say Dark Lord, because there's the Dark Lord and its creator. The Dark Lord Adam and Viktra Mordenheim. Interesting. Basically, Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. Now, there is some very similarities between Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster that I could see you could basically, to a degree, remove. But you can also still see, in Viktra, very easily, the entire thing still. Hey, it's still the same, kind of. Maybe it's a little less on the nose than Viktra and Adam were, certainly. But it's still there, so I don't know the definite change in it. So, again, Mordenheim was a man who basically is a Dr. Frankenstein, loosely based on the character. They specifically say that in the information. He's a good surgeon. He married a woman named Elise. And basically created a monster. He created Adam. He created life. He did a Frankenstein. And basically blasphemed against the gods. So his creature was imbued with dark powers And Ravenloft grabbed both of them. His castle, and, his deadly plot. And so... But he's not the Dark Lord. Adam was. His monster was. It's interesting to say, because Adam fled after crushing Elise, his wife, and causing the disappearance of a young girl, Eva. He became the Lord of Lamordia. So, Mordenheim followed him. Here's where I did find some people talking about this, and basically giving an interesting idea. Yeah. It's very interesting that it's one of those things that it's basically saying, in a way, that Viktra is effectively... They gave a story of being like a daughter of Viktra. And effectively, Viktra being a product of the dark magic and kind of all the stuff that happened there, and being sent away to be raised by relatives originally. And so, when everything was drawn into the Dark Lord, it's a very interesting trying to combine the two storylines of Lamordia, what happened. And I'm not going to get into details about it, it's complex. Maybe I will if I do a Lamordia video, so I'll talk about this entire set of 3 together. But effectively, when Viktra came in being, she took the mantle from Victor and Adam, and found her own Elise, and basically became Lamoria's new lord. I don't know where to go with this, because this is a kind of like a rewriting of the entire lore that I'm not sure was necessarily needed, because it's still Frankenstein. You're not getting away from that. We can reference that a lot, but I don't know why they walked. Maybe the direct reference was too much. I don't know. But the rewrite isn't necessarily bad, and changing the Dark Lord to basically one that is of the Mordenheim in blood, that basically replaces the old ones. And remember, she awoke in Lamordia. I think that's a kind of hint that whether or not she's the direct daughter of Victor or a relative that basically replaces the old two ones, the Adam, who was kind of a lord but a manufactured thing because of the two before, that their conflict, their battle with each other. And if it was kind of a cycle that's meant to repeat, I don't know. But it is an interesting idea to think about that I kind of wanted to hint at here with talking about the two. Alright, let's keep going, because we do have some smaller ones to kind of talk about here before we finish up today, of some Dark Lords. And we're going to do 2, well, there's Adam. Sorry, I didn't show the picture of Adam. I didn't want to do that here. Let's talk about 2 that were introduced in 5th edition. Hey, new Dark Lords. Well, that's very cool. They did introduce ones. So the Carnival is an interesting realm because it's very small. It is just a carnival. But it is now a Demiplane of Dread, led over by Isolde and her intelligent, corrupted holy adventurer, Nepenthe. It is also able to travel to other Demiplanes of Dread. They don't stay long because they fear that they would basically corrupt the realm there and kind of connect together and make it very difficult to do stuff. And it is its own existence, meaning the Dark Lord can't visit the Carnival, but anybody else can. Isolde is was devoted holy water of a god. Defended the Feywilds against dragons, demons, and others. Effectively is an Eladrin, an elf native to the Feywild. She battled against a lot of these things, impressed a Archfey, who then actually enlisted fiends that she had defeated to basically turn against her, effectively getting her under the Archfey's power. Basically befriended her to help her out. Eventually, the Archfey killed off the rest of her warriors. In her depression, put her in charge of a Fey Carnival. But eventually that one crossed paths with another Carnival from the Shadowfell, and they switched spaces. Which wouldn't have been much in of itself, but then the basically corrupted holy adventurer Nepenthe found her way into Isolde's possession, and effectively then they became a Dark Lord combined. The Dark Powers basically wanted Nepenthe, and yeah. Nepenthe is hoping to use Isolde to escape the Dark Powers who have corrupted it, basically. The powers of Ravenloft. But they're kind of together, and they can travel between the Demiplanes of Dread. But the Dark Powers occasionally influence where it goes. Still, they cannot escape anymore from the shadow. Now, the other one, which doesn't have as much information, but I thought was just one of my favorites to talk about here, is a ghost train. Why, yes, it's the Cyre 1313, the Mourning Rail, with the Dark Lord, the Last Passenger. Effectively, a disaster known as the Mourning in Eberron. This is a Demiplane of Dread created in Eberron. I will mention that they're Demiplanes of Dread created from all the known material planes. Basically, the nation's capital, something bad was going on. This last train was going to escape. People were going onto it. But it delayed because a VIP was coming. And hundreds were forced from the train to allow the security for the VIP. And when the lightning rail, this magical train, departed, it was too late. It was caught up in the morning, and everybody died there. But the mist claims the train, and all aboarded it. So now it just hurtles through the mists, traveling a traveling domain. That basically is a ghost train. With its lord, the Last Passenger, this VIP, who basically caused the end of everything in here, which very little is known about. Again, this is just something introduced. I think I have to do more research to see if there's any more places that talk about it, but I didn't find anything beyond this book here, in Van Richting's Guide, to talk about it. So this was a really cool one. I did want to mention it. I thought it was neat. Now, there are some older ones that, basically, they're unchanged in 5th edition, but I wanted to mention them because they are from older editions. And this is, of course, The Sea of Sorrows. Captain Pieter van Riese. Sea of Sorrows was the actual sea in Ravenloft. It was kind of connected to a lot of other planes. It still is now, in a lot of ways. Anywhere that there is water still connects to the Sea of Sorrows. And Pieter is effectively the ruler of here. She's a prisoner of the Sea of Sorrows. She was an explorer, merchant, privateer. She's cursed to sail the seas of Ravenloft as a hateful ghost, and on a ghost ship. So, yeah. Effectively, a very ruthless and unsavory pirate captain, privateer. A reputation for attaching her captives by ropes and basically keel-hauling them. Dragging them under the keel to the drowned. And she never removed the detritus of her victims. Even some returned to life as zombies on her ship. The Relentless was her ship, and eventually sunk by rival captains. But she woke in, drawn into the Sea of Sorrows. Water in her lungs, sea creatures making their homes in her flesh. She stirred her crew and their flesh-eating corpses. Yeah. The Relentless sails here, and anywhere that's connected to water, the Sea of Sorrows is. So she connects to many of the other Demiplanes of Dread for those, and there's strange islands and places in amongst the Sea of Sorrows, and there were island realms in amongst the Sea of Sorrows. So that's to keep in mind. There were places completely surrounded by water. Some of them might not be anymore, some of them might be. It's a mixed bag how the Sea of Sorrows exists now, as it is a Demiplane of Dread. And yeah, it's just unusual and strange. And they do mention her in the 5th edition book. And the last one I wanted to mention is a very simple one that we don't have an update on, necessarily, because it was in the 5th edition book, but I do want to mention this last one of the main ones. Alfred Timmy. Who is Alfred? Well, other than a Darklord, which we haven't heard a lot about, so whether or not his domain has changed since... It didn't change in the Grand Conjunction, but post that, with a lot of changes, may have. Lord of Verbrek, and was the son of the Lord of Arkenden, Nathan Timothy. Alfred Timothy, and a riverboat merchant. He believed his father was overly tolerant of humans and jealous of his father's power. Wasn't paid attention to. Wandered through Ravenloft, like his father had done before, seeking fortune and fate. Basically, his father had become a Darklord. He slaughtered some sheep. Basically, he was captured by some townfolk who tried to burn him alive before some. Hey! Vistani came and saved him. Told him of his, basically, powers and his fate. He tempted fate against the Vistani. That was the leader who pursued his future. Tried to attack her, but was engulfed by the mist of Ravenloft, and became the Lord of Verbrek. Pretty simple stick, a werewolf lord. It comes from a place that's very bestial. Werewolves and direwolves lord over his domain more than anything, and the Vistani are tolerated. Because he does have a debt to them for saving them. But he hates all other intelligent things, and much more so than his father and his own. Which I didn't mention, but isn't. But yeah, there's Verbrek and Alfred Timothy. A classic domain which we haven't heard about, but it's a very simple domain, explaining why maybe we don't really hear about it a lot. A werewolf domain. Let's go for our extras today before we finish up talking our Darklords. Let's be introduced to two famous individuals from other planes, which were Darklords historically, but got out of it. Where do we start? Let's start with our favorite boy of all, Vecna. This is a very 3rd into 4th edition version of Vecna. I'm sure you've seen art from Vecna from things like Stranger Things. Of course, there's a version of Vecna in Dead by Daylight. I could have used one of those. I really could have, but I wanted to use classic God Vecna with the spectral hand and ghost eye because he lost his hand and eye of Vecna. You know, I went very classic Vecna for the image I wanted to show off here. Why? Well, Vecna is a god now. So, Vecna is probably one of those individuals that may have actually escaped his imprisonment. Sorry. Has escaped his time there. He was ruled of Cavitus, and for a time could still be Dark Lord of Cavitus. Hard to say if it exists or not. It was from is in both Forgotten Realms. Greyhawk has had both of those. So yeah, effectively has been around in various places. And yeah, basically, it's really hard to say because he's a god in a lot of ways, but has had a lot of adventures. And he was a Dark Lord for a time, previous to his devouring of Uts and becoming a full divine being from a demigod. So whether or not Cavitus still exists, I can't say, because this Dark Lord left. While he was still a demigod, he got trapped there, effectively. And it became a lot more stuff and divine intervention and adventures and kind of crap happening in a massive storyline going on. But yes. Vecna, very famous ones. I just wanted to mention him a little bit. The other that I want to mention, which this is a shout out to all my friends out there who know some classics. Lord Soth. Why is Lord Soth a classic? Well, for one thing, good old Lord Soth here is from Dragonlance. He comes from Kryn. Kryn is the realm, material realm of Dragonlance. The planet, I should say. The third planet of Dragonlance's solar system. So, Soth is from Dragonlance. Yeah. And he came to Sithicus. Whether he exists within Sithicus or not, that's a discussion. It's later rolled by another one. What happened to Lord Soth, I can't tell you to. I didn't dive into him. But I did want to give a shout out to this one because it's, all my friends who love Dragonlance. I didn't get to as into depths of Dragonlance as others, but I knew of Lord Loren Soth. I'm sorry, Loren Soth. I call him Lord Soth, but he's Loren Soth. He might be a Lord. I guess technically he wasn't. I think it's Lord Soth in a shirt that they have of him. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. His ultimate faith. His Soth returned to Kryn. So he did get back to Kryn as being a Dark Lord because of all the shit that happened in Ravenloft. He basically got trapped there for a while and eventually escaped. That's a story for another day. Maybe I'll do a video on Lord Soth in relation to this and his untold history, because it's interesting and revolves around Dragonlance, which I haven't talked about at all. Anyway, but yeah, there's the other one I wanted to mention for the two extras. That's a good introduction into Darklords and how lore has evolved. I think that's the other thing I wanted to kind of go on with all this, is the lore of Ravenloft has definitely heavily evolved. It is both a fortunate and unfortunate thing that evolution is interesting. What do I mean by that? Well, the 5th edition lore changes a bunch of things in interesting ways, but I don't always know if it's good or bad. I think that's the kind of way I kind of talk about this. That we see 5th edition, especially now, doing lore in a way that's very exact. And I don't think it's necessarily bad all the time, but it is unique. When we look at Viktra and Viktra, was that needed? Was that rewrite needed? I don't know. Others, like Azalin, we're not mentioning all the depths of what Azalin did. The connections between the realms, we don't really need to mention that. It doesn't exist the same way anymore. We talk about things like the Sea of Sorrows and the Carnival to show there is still connections between the Demiplanes, but not the same way. Other ones like Verbrek, it's a simple place that doesn't need to be talked about. And that's the thing is, talking about all the Darklords, we might not have all of them all. Not all the realms may exist anymore. There's a lot of questions that we won't ever have answers for, and 5th edition doesn't necessarily dive into them. It doesn't need to. It gave us a good example of them in the book. That's why I think Van Richten's Guide is a pretty good one, and I recommended it at first. Certainly speaking, if you want to use Verbrek and Alfred Timony, you could, Timothy. You very well could. We know about it. We know about a bunch of other Demiplanes, and there is old lore on some of them that are just mentioned in that book. You can look up the old lore, and maybe I'll do videos on it. Maybe I will. But it just kind of goes to show you that it's a complex thing, all this lore. I think that's the best way to talk about it. It's complex. The fact is, it's a deep lore, and each of these Dark Lords is an interesting story of evil and tragedy. None of them are really great, and all of them have done very dark and horrible things that make them Dark Lords. Whether or not it's, they understand what's going on or don't and kind of find themselves in the situations. Some of them go to dark powers. Some of them are in there and become Dark Lords in their own rights because they are so terrible and wicked. That's the thing, too, is some of them are so terrible that they are beings inside a dark realm, a demiplane of dread, and make another one. Others, have found themselves merged together. There's a lot of complexity there that I think is good to explore and good to know about. But I hope just this exploration I've done lets you know what a Darklord is, what a Demiplane of Dread is, makes you understand Ravenloft as a whole a lot more, and that it has a little bit more of a complex history than 5th edition will let you on about, and how you want to interpret that history kind of is unfortunately up to you. I feel like ignoring the history is bad. Acknowledging it in small ways is okay. I think they should have acknowledged more of the history and talked about it more. I don't know. It's this weird spot that it has a history. We should talk about it a little bit. We might not be able to need all of it, but just ignoring your history isn't good. And I feel like sometimes they've ignored it. We'll leave it there. I hope you enjoyed this kind of dive into it in my mixed feelings on the way this is. I really do love Ravenloft as a setting. It's really interesting. I don't use it very much for stories because it is very complex and it makes certain types of stories that you have to tell. They're horror stories. They're horror and stories of various different kinds, and basically every demiplane you go to should tell a different type of horror stories. Like, I'm going to tell you, Verbrek could probably be the beasts versus men kind of horror story. It's much more than just werewolves. It's nature turned against you in a lot of ways because nature is embraced and intelligent beings are not. And they be hunted and slaughtered. So you can see stories that would be there. Haunted ships, haunted trains, evil carnivals, all these kind of things. Science gone wrong. Intrigue and murder. Dark rituals. Haunted ghosts. Alien nature. And of course, classic vampire Dracula kind of stories. I just went down the list of the stories you tell with those worlds that I went into detail. Anyway, please remember to give all the support if you're over on YouTube, like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that kind of normal stuff. I give that shout out too. Remember to, of course, check me out on Twitch. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays right now. These all go up a couple days afterwards from when they're live. So you can still check them out on YouTube if you can't join me live. Remember to check out my social media. I do other tabletop stuff. Crimson Queen on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. in the evening. And discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6. Okay, everybody, I'm going to get going. Go hang out with Twitch. I'm going to go chat some more and stuff like that. But until the next time, I do one of these videos, talk more about Ravenloft in the future. So maybe I will. I bid all of you a deep and wonderful farewell.